So welcome to It's Not All About the Numbers, the leadership podcast that doesn't just focus on the bottom line. Hi, my name is Chris and that is Mike.
Hi everyone.
And this week we're doing a special. And as you can probably tell from the microphone, we're actually sat in the same room, which is a bit interesting. I think it's the first time we've done the podcast in the same room.
It's very different.
It is a bit different, especially with people grinding coffee in the background, but it's all very cool in this co-work space. But if you're liking what we're doing, then always remember to subscribe and select those 5 stars, and also let your friends and colleagues know, because the audience is slowly growing and we'd love to get more and more input into the podcast. So as I said, this is going to be a bit of a special, and we're going to go into a few topics that Mike and I want to talk about. But first of all, as always, Mike, how was your week?
It's been a really good week, actually. It's half term at the time of recording, so I'm going to focus on the kind of mind growing stuff. So Monday I went to Weymouth, and I've listed it out as beach, sunshine, and the first outing of the shorts this year. So that was quite nice. And obviously today, Friday, I'm here with you in Southampton. We've already been walking the dog, and I've got very muddy shoes. So that's kind of like the mindfulness bit. The work has been, the thing that I can remember from this week is 2 really long webinars. I think I mentioned last week I was doing some stuff with the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. They're kind of like therapy. It was talking about stuff that I've done in the past. So that was quite interesting. And I forgot to mention last week that we'd had an Open DEFRA reunion. So that was the people that had worked on the Open DEFRA project, releasing 8,000 data sets in a year. Probably the best team of people that I've ever worked with as a group. It was just phenomenal. So it was really nice to see a bunch of those online a week or so ago.
How long ago did you work with them?
So that was 2016 and 17.
Wow, it's quite a long time ago.
Yeah, it was nice. It was almost like it was a drop-in session on Zoom. So it was really nice to see a bunch of people I've not seen for a while, and just sort of chat about what's going on, old times, how things have changed.
Who's doing well?
Exactly.
Who's dropped off? Who's retired?
Well, I think by definition, if you've dropped off or you're not doing well, you don't dial into those things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, chance to brag and all that. Good stuff. So yeah, my week was interesting. It was half term, so it was a bit of work and play, juggling throughout the week. Busy one for family because it was Pancake Day, big day in the house, and Valentine's Day as well. So lots going on at home. Work-wise, we did our lunch and learn, which we might dig into a little bit later, which is basically a get-together of our community to talk about all the great things that they want to talk about. And also, I probably mentioned in the past that I'm a trustee for the AAT, one of the accounting institutions, and they had a career day. So I was spreading the wisdom of how to use LinkedIn and how to become a CFO to a load of budding students. And I definitely felt like the old man on the call, I have to admit. I got the question, so how has everything changed in the last 20 odd years? And it's like, right, okay, yeah, that's definitely the guy with the bit of grey in his beard answering that one. But
fortunately, they were only asking 20 years. We were talking before we started recording, and I think it's worth just something to scratch out there around experience, and actually, because I've done something similar here in Southampton at the university, and going to do careers days, you really do realize how much experience you've got in stuff.
Yeah.
And you were saying the same. So
yeah.
How did that manifest in that session?
I think it's really interesting. You sort of go in and you want to impart a lot of knowledge, and you want to impart like some nuggets when it comes to career. But the thing is, there's so much in there, and it definitely, the value of what you're saying depends on the career stage that you're at. And in a way, the value of what you're saying to students, I kind of found it was almost like the least amount of value I could offer, because really at that point in time, you're starting out and you just need to learn a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And you need to probably focus on doing your exams with the AAT in this case. And that was, so I was being more of a motivator, I suppose, than a strategist or a tactician. But that was good enough, that they could see me as an ex-member and someone who'd been through that route. They could see me being successful, and I was also talking about LinkedIn and how you use LinkedIn, and they could see me running a business through LinkedIn as well. So yeah, slightly different to sitting down with a bunch of CFOs trying to work out team dynamics and their sort of automation strategies or whatever it may be.
For sure. I mean, and that resonates really strongly. So when I came back here, I was talking to a bunch of oceanography students at the university. And at the time I was working in DEFRA. And actually most of the conversation post like the panel session was around, what's the civil service like? Is it worth joining? To which the answer was yes, because then you can try a bit of everything. You can move around a lot and try different things. So it wasn't actually about my career path, which I would actually describe as quite random. It was much more about the opportunities given by the organisation I was working for at the time.
So we did say this is going to be a bit of a special. So we're not going to run through the usual agenda. We'll come back to that next week when we've got our next co-host. But I think, you just mentioned the sort of random direction of your career, and, we both met and decided to do this podcast. And I think it'd be nice just to sort of recap a little bit on why we're doing the podcast and why we're doing it together. And maybe some of our motivators. You just sort of said there you've had quite a random career, and now you've landed in this space of consulting and translating and converting people from being a technical audience into a sort of non-technical audience to get stuff done. Why are you doing this podcast at the end of the day?
Why are we still doing this podcast?
Why are we still doing this podcast?
It's a really interesting one. So there's a number of reasons. I suppose the first question, well, the first bit of what you just asked is about why is it I do what I do, or what is it that I do really, and that translator type.
Yeah, I was kind of guessing at that.
Yeah, and sitting in that space between like different types of experts, so be that legal experts, business experts, or technical IT experts, and sort of sitting in that space in the middle and translating. And the reason I do that is I love listening to people and then interpreting what they're saying in language that I understand, and then reinterpreting that to others, and sort of sitting in that kind of space of really trying to understand. And that really links to the podcast. So we've spoken to a bunch of people that either or I know, or they're from our network that we find really interesting, and actually getting under the skin of why they're interesting and translating. For me, it's learning. It's all about learning and translating what they're saying into language and things that I understand. I find brilliant, and it's my way of learning. If you give me a management manual to read, then I might get 2 or 3 pages in and get bored and go and read a Jack Reacher novel. So actually talking to people for me is that way of learning. And that's why I'm loving what we're doing with the podcast, because the people we're having on are fascinating.
Do you think that's going to become sort of more and more commonplace as people, I was talking to a bunch of students this week, and, the way that they learn and the resources they have and the mixed media that they have to learn nowadays, seems to be just completely different to how I used to learn, which was very much paper-based, no conversation, no community. Can you see that it's definitely the norm in professional training, but can you see that becoming more of a norm in business generally, community becoming more important?
So I think the short answer is definitely. The longer answer sort of harks back to something we spoke about a couple of weeks ago with Becky and approaches, right? And how people do different things. So we talked with Becky around my aversion to networking.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that manifested when I was at university was I hated to go to the library. So actually, I when I did my first degree back here in Southampton 30 years ago, I really struggled because there weren't the other ways of learning.
Yeah.
There was only go to the library, get a book out, and if the book's out, you have to go on a list and wait for it. I found that incredibly hard as a thing. Whereas now, I reckon when I did my master's degree, my IP law degree, it was all on the internet. So I didn't have that barrier to entry. So I think, sort of tangenting off what you said slightly, but I think what the mixed media and the internet and the different approaches to learning now gives people is, if you're not suited to one style, there are other styles you can engage with. Whereas back 30 odd years ago, you had to do it a particular way.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that the podcast becomes part of people's sort of informal, non-CPD learning, right? Because we are aiming to, bring lots of different opinions, and within each episode, we're certainly covering an awful lot of topics. Even last week, we covered everything from sort of open data and toilet data all the way through to sort of change management and, working together under difficult circumstances. There was a bit in there about working in business versus working in public sector. There's a lot in everything that we do. One of the things that was quite interesting, though, from our lunch and learn this week, which is, like I said, it was when we get everybody together and we ask people to send in questions, and then we vote on the questions. And one of the questions was actually around the topics we should be discussing. And it went on to podcasts and themes like that. But there were a lot of people who don't listen to podcasts. And it almost seemed like you needed to be doing something else to listen to a podcast. So, am I doing the washing up or the dog walk? Then I can find time for podcasts, because it's seen as sort of informal and not a guaranteed learning. Whereas, if you're going to sit down to study something in terms of CPD or a structured training course, then you might, do it at lunchtime or carve out half an hour. But I was just surprised that I feel like the world's gone mad for podcasts, that some people still do not listen to podcasts. But then again, not everyone's on YouTube or X, right?
I suppose. So there's something in there about asynchronous activity, and I think we're moving from things are we turn on the radio and listen to whatever's on, to a much more selective approach to what you listen to. So I definitely listen to podcasts when I would have in the past listened to the radio and listened to like Radio 5 or something like that. There's a place for both, and I think it's almost like podcasts are designed to be listened to while you're doing something else. In my mind, I think that's almost the purpose. I struggle a little bit with a podcast being like CPD, because I think it is optional. It's very much, it's almost like self-development. I'm hoping people listening to us ramble because they like listening to us ramble rather than
it's the coffee break at the training course, not the training course. Yeah,
exactly right. So do you ask me the question about why are we doing the podcast, or why are we still doing the podcast? So why are you still keen? Why are you still here?
I'm really enjoying it. I'm enjoying talking to lots of different people, and I think one of the surprising things actually from the start, where I thought this would go and where we are actually, is that I've really enjoyed listening to people outside of my profession, because it's sort of broadening my understanding of how other professions work and how other organizations work. I've never worked in government. I've never worked in public sector. We have all of the same kind of technical management leadership problems, but they're all offering different perspectives. And I think it's, there's nice sort of reassurance and solidarity in that, but there's also real nuggets of learning. And I think I've really enjoyed the sort of diversity of the speakers. But why am I still doing it? I think, my personal motivation with this has always been, I think we all need to get closer to change and transformation. And use of data and technology, and that's where we definitely clicked in terms of, you and I sort of having these sort of transformation conversations, and then there was a lot in common when we'd started to dig into it, and I feel that by having these conversations, we may be early adopters, we may be ahead of the curve, time will tell, but I genuinely think that if people can get these new skills, these future skills as people talk about them, right, then we have better futures, we have a better job, we have better careers, and we have new careers, and we're part of the change rather than resisting the change. And I think there's still a very long way to go, which is why this is not going to sort of end anytime soon, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm a little bit worried in what you've said, purely and simply because part of my shtick, I think, is very much the silos that we operate in are all experiencing the same problems. And actually, if you start getting it, then I'm going to get less opportunity to talk to people, right? Because I definitely, so I 100% agree. One of the things that people say is that we need to break down silos between teams, and we need to break down silos between different expert groups. And I feel quite strongly, and I may have said this before, but I feel quite strongly that silos are the ways humans operate. So we break the world up into expert bits, so be it the environment, be it accountancy, be it HR, whatever it is. And actually it's about those silos talking to each other in a really effective way. And just learning that we're experiencing common problems starts to break down, or not break down the barriers, but sort of make those conversations happen. You can start to have those conversations in a non kind of siloed way.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point when we talk about silos, because I think part of the change is that a lot of the benefits that we're looking at when it comes to transformation, they're actually end to end. They're whole company, and I think that's one of the biggest changes, that the silos get it, but also the overall benefit isn't siloed anymore. The whole digital transformation kind of agenda is about whole business change, business model change. And I think it's, people have been ready in their silos to act, but now actually they do want to come together to make change. But the other motivator for me doing this is that, as great as that conversation is, there's still a shed load of failure and confusion, even when it comes to terminology, let alone actually process and implementation. I think there's so much to do on this, and we've only really just started. And I was one of the early adopters in terms of my world, the accounting and finance space. I saw the use of technology being integrated into what we do at some point within my career, and I started to chase that. And it's started to bear fruit now. You can see. In fact, I shared something yesterday, which I thought was a real kind of realization almost of a lot of the conversations that I've had over the last 15, 20 years. OpenAI are recruiting for a strategic finance data scientist. It's like, what the hell? That is the job that I was talking about, 10 years ago, when I was trying to say to, the accounting and finance world, we've got a digital world coming, we've got a business world coming, and they're all going to collide into one place. And when I look at OpenAI's job description, it's basically defining what we call the digital finance function. And it's not just a technical role, it's a non-technical role. So I'm super excited because not only, is this just a bit of theory between, Chris and Mike on a Friday, but it's actually manifesting itself in the market. But I wish that there were more people doing it and we weren't talking about silos.
So that's really cool, and I like that. And it kind of links all the way back round to the people that we're getting on. They're really interesting people. They've got a story in this kind of transformation space from lots of different angles, and actually bringing that all together is the change. So I really like that.
Bringing people together, I think, is the real crux. I think you've always sort of, when we first met, we had a great conversation about, being sort of transformative, and we both sort of talked about this term pre-consulting came up. It was like, who inside the business can be the advisor before you get the expensive consultants in? Who can be the entrepreneur? And you talked about it as pre-consulting, and I was like, yes, absolutely, we need to sort of nail that, and that's starting to happen. But I feel that this change has only just started, and there's so many ways that this can go, but we need to get people together to form a consensus as to how it should go. And you've always sort of said to me that getting people together has been one of our community skills. And I mentioned the lunch and learn. That's another great example where we're sitting people down and we're talking about what they want to talk about. And I learned something yesterday, and I'm all over this subject. The top question that we voted on was, how are we developing our people? But what was actually underneath that question was, I'm as a leader, I now have double the number of direct reports that I had or I was expected to have 10 years ago. I have less time to develop these people. I have less time to, bring them on a journey. And by the end of that conversation, it had actually morphed into the changing workplace because of the impact of, everything that's happening from economy to digital. We're creating almost two classes of worker, where you have experienced managers and leaders who will just continue up, the rich, if you like, rich in experience. And then you have team members who aren't going to be invested in as much, who are almost like the poor in experience. So fascinating conversation that would have never have happened without people coming together to have those conversations.
I think that's really interesting. And so on the first bit, absolutely agree that bringing people together and people being able to share allows you to have those conversations. And the specifics of that one, I think it's really interesting in terms of the two classes of people, potential two classes of people, because actually it links back to our first conversation, or the first bit of this conversation, around different learning styles and different approaches. So if you're a manager right now, the chances are you're slightly older. You went through university or your postgrad or your education at a particular point. And actually what newbies into the field now are going to experience is going to be totally different. Their ways of learning and actually getting experience and upskilling is going to be totally different. You don't sit in one company and do that kind of stuff now. And I think part of it is actually what are our expectations of ourselves as managers and leaders, really. There's a little bit there. How much do we empower people to go and find out some of this stuff for themselves? I don't know.
But there was an interesting...
I'm really gutted I couldn't make the call now.
Next time. It was exactly that point where good leaders were saying, I want to invest time in the team, but because of the change in expectation around having flatter hierarchies and more direct reports, because that's seen as the sort of a progressive way to go, then they had less time to invest in people. But also the sort of the future of work, remote working, flexible working impact on this was that they felt that they didn't even see people enough to even if the opportunity was there, it's going to be online, which is totally different to meeting in the workplace. And I think when the pandemic came around, there was a lot of sort of throwaway lines around, I'm missing the water cooler and I'm missing my coffee breaks and all that sort of stuff. But it's really manifesting itself now as, well, the learning opportunities aren't there, or I'm not being seen in the office to build those relationships for a promotion, or, to get that management support. And this isn't around mental health, because I think that's, further down that road where people are struggling. This is just doing a good job, in the first place.
That makes sense. It comes back to it. It's just different now. We need to adapt to the different scenario that we find ourselves in with remote working. I mean, I really love it that you've picked up and run with the lean coffee idea that I came across through the One Team Gov stuff that I was doing in government, which was basically, how do you get the people across government that are working in a particular field to come together and support each other, was the premise behind that.
Yeah.
And through that, I got into things like unconferences and the lean coffee, which effectively, both of those are, how do you create a structured environment to allow water cooler conversations to happen? That's exactly what they are. And I think that I would advocate more and more of that is what's probably needed. How do you create open space events, which is what they're called, to allow people to have those kind of ad hoc contacts with their bosses, with their colleagues, that they don't get if they're just remote working.
I see the value, and I thank you for introducing me to Lean Coffee. And I think there's also, people don't trust it. It's like, oh, if we get everybody in a room and there's no agenda, there's structure, but there's no agenda, then not
anarchy.
How do we guarantee that this is worthwhile? What's HR going to say? What about the cost? Blah blah blah. But the thing is, you trust in the process, you trust in the methods, they've been tried and tested. As long as you have a strong facilitator, as you are, and I know my subject, so that helps when I'm doing my Lean Coffee work, then I think it would be fine. And this stuff is all about getting conversation going, and people, I think, are desperate to talk. One of the actions that we had from the session yesterday was, as leaders, we need to create an environment for learning, for exploring skills, attitudes, behaviors, like new skills, attitudes, and behaviors. So it's creating a learning environment in this new world that we're in.
Absolutely. And so I feel like I'm going to get on a hobby horse about open space now a little bit, but then sort of linking back to where we started off here about a leader with many more direct reports who probably feels like they need to spend more time, the same amount of time with everybody. So therefore they've got double the amount of time they need to spend in order to lead. Actually, some of the open space technologies, types of approach can actually provide that space, that learning environment space. Quite often, I think when we talk about learning, people think courses, structured events. Oh, somebody's going to give me a PowerPoint presentation and I get some CPD for it. Yeah, of course, that's one way of doing it. But actually, what you've described as the problem is peer learning from your colleagues, being able to ask questions in a way where that you get an answer rather than fobbed off. Part of the problem with like the Zoom type of meetings for me is they're so transactional. You have a meeting in the diary. The meeting is to discuss this. You log on at your set time or 20 minutes late. You do the meeting. And then you finish and you go and you don't have any chat. Yeah.
If you didn't notice, the 20-minute late dig was at me there, because I'm notoriously late, but only because I'm busy. I think that this is super valuable. And I would recommend anybody who's, in a leadership or a management position to check out, that approach. And I think the people who are involved, they're so engaged and they benefit from it so much. In fact, there's almost like we're fans of this approach, and I didn't realize we were going to talk about it so much, but I actually realized that yesterday there were a couple of people on the call basically saying, this is such a good way of doing things. Why don't we have more people doing it, Chris? And Gen CFO is a peer-to-peer community. It's only just really getting going. So I do hope in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time, there are hundreds, even thousands of people getting involved in this, because that type of learning, that type of sort of peer support will lead to change. That's the whole goal here, right? And going back a step to personal motivations for sort of doing the podcast, I really have been on quite a journey career-wise, And I've seen the value of some of these conversations. I've seen the value of transformation, and I want to keep doing the podcast, and I want to keep doing Gen CFO, because I think it's sort of in me now, almost as a sort of personal passion to try and make change. And this all started from a fraud story a very long time ago, and identifying fraud and dealing with fraud is a use case for a lot of the digital transformation work. But it's not just about that. It's about really improving our jobs and improving our careers, and setting up the teams of the future, which I call digital finance function, but it could be digital any function really.
I really like that, and I love that passion, and I think that I just wanted to link it back to a story that we used. So we developed some training a year or so ago now, probably a foot longer, and we used the Kodak story as part of that training. And one of the things that, if you look at the Kodak story from being the biggest camera film manufacturer in the world to bankruptcy in about 10 years, if you look at the story, they had the answer within their organization. It was there. They invented the digital camera. They invented the sensor that pretty much every smartphone has got a version of within it, like in the 70s.
Yeah.
What they didn't do is they didn't look within and think broader than what they were currently doing. And I think that that's what you're describing in some respects, is how do we harness the peers that we have to make that change and identify what the change is that's needed. So yeah, I really like that.
I sometimes refer to it as sort of collective intelligence, right? And I use this analogy sometimes when I'm trying to describe Gen CFO to people who haven't been before. And I talk about it as, who wants to be a millionaire show for your career? And you get to that point where you don't have the answer and you've got a few options. You can phone a friend, right? You can ask for a couple of the answers to be taken away, or you can ask the audience. Well, that collective intelligence that helps contestants in those shows are exactly the same as what you can do in your professional career. And as well as that, because it's not just about answers, it's about support and shared ideas and even motivation, right? Because do you talk like this with friends and family and the wife? Because no one's interested, right?
I'm sitting here shaking my head. So not exactly. No. I think no. And you need to have that common ground to talk about in terms of, I'm experiencing this in a particular activity. I got one, I think we're going to move on a little bit. It looks like we're going to move on, but I've got one final quick question on this, which is, who wants to be a millionaire? Do you see yourself as Tarrant or Clarkson?
Neither.
Okay.
Well, being called Christopher, I was called Chrissy Wissy a bit when I was younger.
I remember that.
It's driven me mad. Well, he was one of the main DJs when I was growing up, or Chris Tarrant. But I'm neither, for sure. I can't see myself in that role. Even though I would love to go on it one day, but who knows? So every podcast, we are always looking for questions. And if you want to send in your questions to us, then you can send it to podcast@generationcfo.com, or you can reach out to Mike and myself via LinkedIn. That's probably one of the best ways to go about it. And I did want to just pull up a question from yesterday's Lunch and Learn. Now, I touched on, how do we develop our people? That was quite a serious subject. But actually, the second subject was, what topics should we be talking about on the podcast? And, we obviously just shared a lot of our thoughts around the podcast. But Mike, what sort of things would you want people, say, by the end of the year to know a bit more about being part of the podcast?
It's a really difficult question to answer in like a straight way, because the straight way of answering it would be like a list. So
Yeah.
starting with intellectual property rights and open data,
What
data
Mike does,
licensing.
how you can engage Mike on your
Yeah,
project.
exactly. Yeah, and here's my CV.
Yeah.
But all of those things that are on my CV and on your CV are effectively our experiences. What I hope people will get out of the podcast over the year, and in particular from the guests that we have and the conversations that we have, are that the problems that we're all facing are common. There are different ways of tackling the same thing, and they're all okay. Well, depends on what they are. Fraud, not so much, but in general, the approaching a problem in different ways is all okay. And actually sharing what you're trying to tackle with people means that you might get feedback that you never expected that actually helps you solve the problem. So I realize that that's like not specifically answering the question around what topics, because I think actually the interesting stuff that comes out of this podcast and the conversations we've had so far is in part the topics. And Giuseppe last week talking around open data around toilets was fascinating. Yeah. But actually it was the conversation around there is no one solution. So open data as an approach is not the only solution to the problem of extracting value from collective information. So
and I wouldn't, I'm glad you didn't go into a list of things, because that would have been quite.
Well, I gave you a bit of a list.
But yeah, no, I'm with you though. I think if I think of, I say topics, but maybe it's just why you would listen week after week after week rather than topics itself, is that the two of us are very passionate about making change, helping leaders make change, and we're going to try and bring really interesting speakers to you.
And I think, sorry, just to interrupt there, but I think the important bit that we both share is that we think that the change starts with the people.
Yes.
And the people are the key bit in that.
Yes. And to grab that back off you, that we believe it needs to start with the people. And a lot of our conversations are around how we start well.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people get that wrong. And I'm a firm believer that if these conversations can help people understand how to go about their planning, how to create a more compelling vision, how to start well on the people side, then the rest will follow. Because going back to a conversation around, pre-consulting and that internal advisor, we want you to start strong so you don't piss money up the wall, to quote Alan Sugar, on a project or engaging consultants or whatever it is, so develop that inner transformer so that you can go on that journey rather than thinking, I just need to go and buy an app for that.
That's just 100% agree with that. If there was 1,000% and it existed, then that. And just I'd written down as you were starting that pre-consultancy, because I wanted to come back to that as well, because I completely agree. What pre-consultancy is to me is that little bit of investment that you have to understand the problem that you're trying to fix and the outcome that you want before you engage your big supplier or your big project. I don't think that that's new. There was something a while back called the intelligent client. So as outsourcing started, what was really important was you were the intelligent client. So even if you're outsourcing your software development, you knew what it was that you were trying to create and you made sure it was created. I don't think that ever landed brilliantly. It was just outsourced. What pre-consultancy is, and in the way that I think about it, is just an iteration of intelligent client. It is, how do we help the people make sure that when they're spending money and not doing that up the wall with it, they're doing it effectively. And it almost is stop, think, ask around, ask internally, ask the people, find out.
So there you go. If you continue listening to the podcast, then by the end of the year, you're going to have this cracked. It's a free course on how to be an entrepreneur, how to commission better, how to not waste money on consultants. It's all that good stuff. Yeah.
That and definitely definitely that, and definitely that, you can probably tell by the way that I'm reacting to the question. It's something I feel really passionately about, is that so much time and money is wasted because people leap to solutioning. And actually just a little bit of time and effort spent working out much more clearly what the problem is that you're trying to tackle. Back to Kodak, Kodak got that wrong. They didn't actually tackle the problem that they were facing, which was that the film industry for cameras was dying.
Yeah,
they didn't tackle that. They didn't even look at that. What they tried to do was shore that up by investing. That's what we're trying to avoid.
And this sounds like a really nice place to actually wrap things up, but I do actually want to dig just one step into the people side. What is it about that getting the people bit right, being people first? What is it that we're actually talking about there? It's almost like we in the past we've covered like mindset and language and culture, change management, all these things, but we're not talking specifically about those things. So for you, what is it on the sort of people-centered approach that is most important?
So I think it's, again, thanks for the easy question.
Sorry.
No, but I think it comes back to all of what you've just listed and more. So quite often when we talk about change and transformation, the thing that we're trying to change is a culture or a behavior or a way of doing things. And culture and behavior and ways of doing things all come from the people.
Yeah.
The processes are designed by people. The algorithms are coded by people. Culture change is the culture of the people. I think one of the things that really struck me as in the language is when you talk to people, I think about culture change, and you'll speak to a senior leader and oh yes, we need to really change the culture. When they say that, they mean everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think if we can just flip, to use a word that we use regularly, if we can just flip that into behavior change, and behavior change means everyone. Everybody has to change if we're trying to transform.
Yeah.
And it's not just the technology that we use, because if you implement new technology, then the behaviors to use that technology have to change.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. So you just can't land it without getting the people on board.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost the wrong word, right? When you talk about, making change or transformation or culture, it doesn't include the word people. If you just put people change, people transformation, people culture, because culture to me is about our common ways of working, our common behavior, whether it's going to a concert and how we act in a nightclub, or whether it's how we act and work in the office. But we've all kind of agreed to this. And I think they're the nuggets that hopefully we can pull out for people, and get a slightly different view on what those ways of working are or how people should be responding. One thing I would say, though, I've got a pet hate about people using the change curve as a demonstration of how change happens, because it really, really, really doesn't happen that way. Change isn't a nice linear kind of approach where people are first sort of shocked and reluctant, and then they go on this journey. Change is messy, and you've got to go into it thinking that there's quite a lot to manage, and how that tends to manifest itself is, you need to put a lot of effort into that start.
So this might be the first disagreement on the podcast, because I actually quite like the change curve, but I agree that change is not a linear process, and it is messy.
Why do you like it?
Because I think that there are definite stages of how humans consider and adapt to change, and you can look at changes, and the first change is pretty much usually denial and anger.
Okay.
Because the example that I throw at you is 20 miles an hour in Wales.
Right.
So the change to 20 miles an hour in Wales, if you looked at the press around that change of the speed limit mainly in urban areas, but I think across the whole country, the first reaction was, well, this is outrageous, this is ridiculous, this change is going to, it's going to cause complete carnage. And that's a useful stage for you to consider when you're trying to implement any changes, that some people will be your pathfinders and will go with it, but quite a lot will be in that resistance kind of thing. In that example, if you look at the logic, why are you doing it? Well, actually, by making this change, we'll make the roads safer for children, we'll reduce the amount of emissions and help with climate change. The logic is all there, but you still get the reaction. So I'm not saying the change curve is perfect, but having this understanding that quite often people go through a negative reaction to change before they get to the positive reaction to change is, I find, quite helpful. There you go. Okay. I can see Chris getting riled up here. He's ready, spoiling for a fight.
My vein on my head's popping out.
I wish we weren't in the same room.
I think that's going to be the next special, because I get where you're coming from, but there's so much to it.
I think my final point on it, and just is, I don't think there's any perfect model for anything. No. So quite often, so one of the things that I've been working on over the last sort of 5 years is applying what's known as the FAIR data principles in different contexts. So that's data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So, and just to use that as to explain what I'm talking about, at a really top level, I don't think anybody can argue with that. If you've got data within an organization, that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable within your organization to some extent.
Yeah.
However, that model has got loads of detail underneath it, which doesn't apply to many organizations and many people, and it's actually very complicated. Yeah. So I really like the 4 letters and the words. I absolutely hate the rest of the model. And I think the same is true with the change curve. I like the broad structure, but it doesn't apply like verbatim to everybody.
I'm keeping my powder dry on this one, because you're protesting too much now. But if
I'm just trying to see how far I can push it.
Just to come back. So if you went back to Wales now and you asked those people who were against it, are you in support of it? What would be the answer?
Well, I guess I would imagine that gradually the negativity would change. Not everybody would end up being supportive, but more people will be supportive because they see the benefits. I'm not getting to places slower than I thought I would. There's less kids dying, so over time, people will transition.
Yeah. No, I disagree, but let's come back to that in a special, because I actually like the idea of us having a bit of a battle on that one. Because, my take would be, they have, it's forced change. They don't actually support it. They've accepted it reluctantly, Agreed. Right? That is how failure happens within business transformation.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I think that's my issue with it, and having a good conversation about that might definitely be a good one. But anyway, let's wrap this up.
That's a real teaser, isn't it?
Yeah. And we're just so that we are going to do not every month, but every sort of 4 to 6 episodes. We're going to do a special just to dig into probably the previous 4 to 6 weeks of episodes and bring out a few of these hot topics. And maybe the next one will be about the change curve and the history of it and how rubbish it is, or how good it is. Who knows? But thank you again for listening. I really appreciate you being part of our mini silent revolution that's happening through your podcast channel. I really, I think it's been a fantastic journey for us. I know that the speakers who come on are shouting about their involvement and what we're doing. And we've only just begun. I think that's the big message. And see it as part of your learning, or your collective intelligence, or your dog walk, or your washing up, whatever it might be. And we will see you next time. So anyway, thank you from me, and thank you, Mike.
Thanks very much, everyone.
And remember, it's not all about the numbers.